Thank you for joining this month's Worksoft webinar on Change Resilient Automation for ERP and Beyond. I'm Alicia Bell, Director of Marketing for Worksoft and your host for today's webinar. Now let me introduce today's speakers. Shoaib Javed is Chief Strategy Officer for Worksoft, where he applies his deep IT and automation visionary expertise to drive the company's business strategy and technology alliances. With Shoaib's help, the world's global 5,000 corporations are adopting process lifecycle automation as the new industry standard, and in doing so, achieving accelerated project times, reduced costs, and improved operational efficiencies. Ty Henson is the Director of Solution Architects for Worksoft. Ty has more than 30 years of enterprise IT and applications experience. He has served in a variety of development, QA, and leadership positions, providing him with an acute understanding of the challenges top firms face mitigating risk in complex systems. Ty has worked with Worksoft products for more than 15 years and is a recognized expert in helping clients realize the benefits of sustainable automation. Today, they will be discussing change resilient automation and using AI to scale enterprise automation value and build easy to maintain bots. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Shoaib.
Thank you, Alicia. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Our topic today is change resilient automation for ERP and beyond. And the keyword there is ERP. So when we talk about automation for ERP, we're really talking about automating business processes that use ERP systems, as well as a number of other applications that are connected to the ERP systems, right? So we're talking about automating end-to-end business process flows, which are primarily based on an ERP system, for example, SAP or Oracle or Workday or others. And therefore, the focus of that automation becomes your end-to-end business processes. So before we get into resilient automation, I wanted to actually outline why automation fails when you do ERP project. And we've been doing ERP for a very long time. So Worksoft has more than a decade of experience with ERP systems and automating ERP systems for very large companies. And we find that there are about 4 main reasons why automation typically breaks. So the first one is application updates. As I said before, it's not just a single ERP application that you're automating. Your ERP application is connected to dozens, maybe hundreds of other applications that cover your whole business process. And for that, all of those applications are changing all of the time, and even core ERP systems now require upgrades several times a year, especially if they are consuming them from the cloud, or consuming SaaS applications. So the frequent change in applications causes automation to break, and there are strategies to mitigate that we'll go through. The second part is, right, in most companies, automation efforts are still siloed. What I mean by that is, there are different teams and different groups automating various bits and pieces of tasks or applications, but there isn't an overall company strategy. And because of that, you're creating these siloed islands of automation, and it's difficult to figure out what kind of benefits you're deriving from that, and who's going to maintain and manage that automation. And therefore, a lot of times those efforts get abandoned because they actually fail to work after a period of time, and then no one's able to put them back together. The third part is the lack of process understanding. As I keep emphasizing, you're automating business processes, and if you don't understand your processes, and if you don't have a good insight into how those processes are actually being executed in the real world, your automation will not be very useful. So if you just ad hoc automate parts of an application without understanding the processes behind it, it won't work, right? So that lack of process understanding is a big reason where automation doesn't actually serve business needs and therefore cannot be sustained over a period of time. And last but not least is this concept of automation sprawl. So most companies duplicate a large amount of automation because different people are building it separately. There isn't a central repository. There is no design behind automation components or reuse. And it's really important to do that to get to resilient automation. So having outlined, why automation breaks, what I want to do next is look at a way to to address these problems and a way to think about automation as a whole. So what we wanted to do at Worksoft, based on, again, more than a decade of experience doing these large automation and transformation projects, was to focus on the full process lifecycle, right? And the first part of that is to understand your processes. And therefore, process discovery becomes really important. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, do you know what your as-is processes look like? And therefore, where you should target automation and how you should organize automation so that it marries up to your business processes. Okay, so that's the first part, understanding. The second part is, use that understanding to build automation for de-risking your processes, right? So this is steps automation where you're making sure that your processes work as intended. It's important to do this middle step, because if you don't test your processes and you don't make sure that they work right, production automation won't work, right? So you got to make sure that whatever you put into production as automation is tested in pre-production. And the best way to do that is actually testing your business processes with the automation you build before you actually deploy them into production, right? So the second part of automated testing, that middle part, becomes really important. And then finally, reusing the work that you have done for automated testing into production automation for RPA. And that way you only take tested components into production. And then when changes occur in your pre-production systems, you already have automation that's built for the updated systems as they go into production, and those components then replace your previous components that you were using for RPA. So that way you have this closed loop between understanding, de-risking, and then optimizing, and therefore you can get holistic value out of your automation effort, and then also get resilient automation that actually provides you benefits for multi-year periods. Okay, so how do you go about doing this, right? And so this is our view. Again, there are multiple other platforms or solutions that you can plug into different pieces, but holistically, if you look at it, the first part of understanding process is actually collecting the process information, and that comes from two sources, right? One source is your backend systems, and you can use process mining to actually mine data from your backend systems through logs or documents or databases, and then reconstruct process flows from them. So that fills in one part of understanding, that gives you tasks and the connection between tasks and the variations of process flows and so on. And then the second part is your end user activity, right? So your end users do work. That information can be collected from end user desktops and then combined with process mining to give you that holistic 360-degree view, which actually gets you not just the tasks and the connections and the process variations, but also the steps inside of the tasks that can be then used for automation, right? So you take that data collection, you feed it into a process intelligence solution. The process intelligence solution tells you, how you should tackle automation, right? So it gives you recommendation of which tasks do you run more frequently, which tasks take the longest, which tasks are most important to your company, and then those are the ones that can be prioritized for automation. The solution also tells you, what are your potential savings from automation if you were to automate those tasks for test automation or for RPA, or if you were to optimize your business processes, what your potential savings might be, and then what you've actually realized through your efforts. So that way you get a running total of how your automation investments are doing. Are you getting a return on those investments or not? And should you continue to invest more or less in your automation efforts, and in what areas, right? So you get this whole idea of what your processes look like and how they're changing, and what should your strategy be for automation, and also what are the results that you're deriving from your automation efforts. Okay, so once you understand all of that, once you have all the steps and all the processes, then you can export those process steps into automation components. And when you do that, you can then build reusable automation components into an automation library. And then when you have that automation library, you can then deploy it for various use cases. So in this case, once we have our automation component library, we can string those components together and use them for test automation, in which case we'll be tied into, CI/CD pipelines or your DevOps infrastructure, so that automation can be invoked from those and be run whenever you make changes for any kind of testing, right? Unit testing, functional testing, user acceptance testing, integration testing, regression testing, and so on. And then you can take those same components, the tested components, and deploy it to production automation. The difference there is that in production automation, you got to be very strict. You have to have encryption, you have to have non-repudiation, you have to have monitoring, you have to have compliance, all of those things, so that nothing goes wrong when that automation is deployed into production. And if something does go wrong, you can correct it fast. And you can also see where problems came from, right? So this whole overall way of looking at automation will get you the right results, more resilient results as you go forward. Okay, so let's take a look at some of this, and then we'll have a full-blown demo so you can actually see it, right? So here I have a process intelligence solution from Worksoft, where we can first outline to you, okay, here are your potential savings from your automation efforts, right? So once you look at processes, we can tell you how much you're possibly going to save through process optimization or test automation or through RPA. And then we can break it down, with the suggestion of, okay, where should you do automation first, right? So you have your optimization top targets, you have your automation top targets, and so on. And then you can track progress to say, okay, how much have you already realized from the potential savings? So you can see that clearly. And then we can also break that down by different departments, right? So you have materials management or logistics or sales and distribution. So from a department head perspective, you can also see whether your particular department is benefiting from those automation efforts, okay? And this is not a one-time thing. This is an ongoing thing. As you do more automation, you get more realized savings. As you add more process information, more processes show up here, more tasks show up here, and therefore more automation targets show up here, okay? The other part that I mentioned, right, is, you really can't automate unless you understand your processes and what needs to be automated, right? So here you can see a process view with process variations. The blue boxes are ones that already have test automation. The blue and green boxes are ones where you have both test automation and RPA. You can see the more frequently used paths within your processes that are both, that are thicker lines. You can see problems with red and yellow, and so on, right? So you get a full view of how your processes are performing, and then how long a particular activity takes, and what should be automated, what's already automated. A white box means it's a target for automation. So you have a home where automation goes, right? So it's not just hanging there, but it's actually rooted into your critical business processes. And therefore, when you make progress, you see where you're making progress, you see how you're making progress, and then you see how you're impacting your business through your efforts, right? So this is really key to building good automation, to have this visual of your process, which was created automatically by the system by combining data from multiple sources using, artificial intelligence and machine learning to rationalize between the sources to get one model and one view of your process. Okay. The second part, right, that's really important is your end user view, right? So here, what we do is to capture what your end users are doing in a sophisticated way, right? So we understand which applications they're interacting with, how they're interacting with those applications. We go under the skin of your applications, right? So it's applying digital photography, right? More, you could even call it an X-ray of what's going on when your users are interacting with applications. And when we capture all those steps, that can be converted into something that can be replayed and is already automated, right? So that's key. So it's not that you're capturing keystrokes or just general information about what's going on with your users. You're actually capturing detailed steps with application objects and interaction parameters, so that you don't have to explicitly write the automation, right? Just the fact that you're using an application with the capture application running in the background creates everything that's necessary to to automate it, right? So it's very intuitive, right? There's no training required. You just turn the application on and you do your day job. It in the background captures everything that you're doing and then consolidates that into a task. That task gets assigned to some project, some process, and then therefore all the steps of the task are captured within that process, and therefore then you can generate the automation component from it, right? Really straightforward and simple. And then when something changes or steps change, you recapture the steps and they get updated automatically. So that way, automation doesn't break when processes change or when applications change. It's a very straightforward way to take just a single step or a single component and then update it very easily as things are progressing, right? And then you can run the newer versions of that automation flexibly. So let's summarize, all the things I talked about into what we call self-healing automation, right? Self-healing automation means that automation that you build once is able to change itself as new parameters arise, right? So the first part of self-healing automation is that unified process model. So if you combine data from process mining, from task mining, from your pre-existing automation that you already have, right? All three of those things give you a process picture. And then you align that into a single model through artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. And there are several ones that actually take disparate pieces of data and patterns and combine them together into that unified process model. So once you have that model, you then model the applications into that, right, into the tasks. So within the application itself, you also have a unified application model. We call ours the object action framework. So what that means is we model applications as windows, objects on windows, and then actions that you can perform against those objects, right? And that model is stored separately from the automation steps themselves, right? And the automation steps are generated on the fly from the model. So if an object, if a window in an application changes, or if some object on an application changes, we update that automation object definition or a window definition, and then every single step in your automation that uses that definition is automatically updated, right? So that you don't have to explicitly go there and find 10,000 different pieces of automation that are using that application and then modify them one by one, right? Just updating the model automatically updates the entire automation chain because it's dynamically generated from the model. And this is seamless to the end user, so you don't have to worry about those kind of things. The third part is the object recognition itself, right? So you have to be consistent when you are able to see an object on the screen and interact with it. And there are multiple advanced techniques to recognize those objects, right? So you could use different object properties, you can use JavaScript APIs that go behind and under the skin of the application. You can use visual machine learning, right? So there's a whole bunch of techniques that are combined together to consistently recognize application objects that you're able to interact with, right? They could be visual objects on a screen, they could be APIs, there could be any number of things that allow you to consistently interact with those applications. So even when those objects change or they move from one part of the screen to another, or they change in some properties, you're able to do fuzzy matching and say, yeah, this object is approximately similar to what I now see. And then I'm going to automatically update the definition of my object because I recognize that new things have been added. And as I do these incremental updates to the model, I constantly stay current as the application keeps changing, right? And then finally the dynamic transformation, right? So these definitions, as they get constantly updated in the background, as new versions of tasks get loaded into the component library, they replace old versions, right? So if I change the way I do order entry and I have added 2 or 3 steps which weren't there before, but I know that this is order entry, I can go find it in my repository and I can change the new steps and replace the old steps, right? So we are doing healing not just from an application level, but we are also doing healing from a process level. And this is what it looks like to apply technology to get sophistication on how to keep automation current and how to make sure that automation doesn't break. So this is something that we have done and perfected over a period of literally decades of experience. And again, we continue to do this to offer unbreakable automation for ERP-based business processes that could involve any number of applications, right? Whether they are web-based applications or desktop applications or even mainframe systems, it doesn't matter. All of those technologies are supported in a uniform model that I'm talking about. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Ty, who can actually show you some of this information so that you can see how it actually works in real life.
All right, thank you, Shoaib. So to set the stage, I will admit that what I'm going to show you by using our platform are many of the topics that Shoaib was just talking about. We realize that if you are not familiar with Worksoft and you listen to Shoaib, that it almost sounds too good to be true. But in fact, it is true. And that's why we like to additionally go a little bit lower and give you some visuals from the product itself to reinforce the concepts. To do this in demo form, I'm going to both get a little tactical and then also raise that up to a little bit more conceptual along the way to reinforce the value overall that the platform is bringing to the table. So let's get underway. What I'd like to do first is bring up an ERP system. So I'm going to use the web form of SAP, and I'm just going to right click and start up capture. This was the yellow bubble at the top left of Shoaib's slide earlier. And this capture provides the ability for us to record user activity, but it really is much more than record. And I'll explain that as we go down this path. Any user can bring this up. In this case, we're going through and placing an order. And notice as we enter the values into the application, we are documenting that in the capture window. That's the record part of this. And I say any user can do this because we're agnostic to the environment. So we have customers that will have production users capture. And as a result, we are going to be able to build automation and documentation and have functional understanding of what's happening. And in fact, this capture could be being captured for the purpose of doing testing or for the purpose of creating production automation or robotic process automation, RPA. It doesn't matter. The fact is that we can monitor a user such as this, and we, as Shoaib has indicated, are collecting everything that we need to accomplish all three of those outputs that I've referred to. Now, in terms of this being more than just record, it's in effect a mini editor. With very little instruction, a user can know how to add comments. So let's say I'm asking a manual tester to manually test one last time. And as a result, we're going to gain automation, but that manual tester is aware of nuance things along the way that they want to comment on. And for example, validate the net value has gone to 0. And even beyond that, we can use what we call live touch to let the user literally touch on that value and insert a step to do that verification. Additionally, they can insert screen captures, knowing that this is going forward into an automated form so that we will collect that evidence at that point. And this is really what we mean by allowing a user to contribute. So this capture is distributable. We can send this out to the desktops of any user, as mentioned, production users, BAs, SMEs, manual testers, whomever. And they can go through this capture experience to contribute. And in doing so, many of those users aren't going out of their way to provide this information. They're just doing their jobs, and we're collecting everything that we need. So to reinforce this, I want to drill into what we've just captured together for our simple order. And by going to the Steps tab, that's the heart of our automation, you can see that we've got some gear icons on the left. Those are just module elements. Those are basically the screens that we went through. And I'll be pointing out more about that as we go. As I click that Steps tab and click on the Step button, our engine invokes and it finds the application and performs that step. So tactically speaking, we can re-perform and test those activities. Let's do a couple of more. The screen has filled in my history, but notice here we're going to input OR in lowercase. So if we click the step button, the editor reaches out and performs that automation. These readable steps are in fact the automation doing the job. And yet what is going on behind this is our ability for this automation to be quite sustainable. And so I'd like to break that down for you as well in a couple of different ways. Here are the steps that we inserted: the comments, as well as the verification. You know, the user just was able to use a live touch operation to insert those steps. And as mentioned, they become part of the automation. But let's take a slightly closer look at the codeless automation in itself. I don't want you to lose any sleep trying to figure out how are we doing this. And it's based on what Shoaib was referring to, the object action framework. So if I scroll over and I show you, here is the object that we have learned from the application as the user has used it, and next to it is the action that we witnessed, and we set the action, yet that action drop down becomes anything that we would want to do against those objects. This is our object action framework, and it's patented technology. Just want to show a quick slide here because this part of it is completely being done by the platform. The user really doesn't have to concern themselves with this level. If two users learn the same object, we're just going to store it once. We're going to link it everywhere that it's being used, and that reduces maintenance over time. And then back in the automation, I can literally drag and drop steps to reorder them. I'm not going to go too far into the weeds here, but maintenance is simple. You're witnessing drop downs to make action changes, drag and drop to change the event of things. And we didn't capture the login, yet I capture that once and I often share it. So I can search for the login process and drag it into my process. And in doing so, I'm adding another gear. We treat automation very much like Legos, where we can easily construct end-to-end scenarios. And in fact, let's put this one to the test. I'll save this one. We've dragged in the login, and at this point, we will close out of the application. And we will run this process. And this is the part where I mentioned, you know, getting fairly tactical, but I wanted you to witness that the captured steps become automation immediately. I ran a couple of them by literally using the step button. This time we'll use the run button, in which case the editor will move out of the way. We dragged in the login, which includes launching the application. So we will witness all of this and really just trying to drive home the ease of use. The reason I'm doing this is because all of the value that Shoaib was referring to, even at a higher level, is predicated on automation. Whether it's being used for testing or for robotic process automation, you can see that it's super simple for this automation to come together. In fact, I mentioned that capture is distributable. We're typically going to start by putting that in the hands of key users and not building our automation, but collecting it. And that's where it becomes extremely valuable in terms of facilitating our automation efforts by building automation quite rapidly, but even more importantly, doing it using the individuals that know the processes. And that's an important element here. We have gained insight in terms of what the user is doing. In fact, let's take a look at the documentation that can be generated as well as a part of this. I'm going to go ahead and kind of keep my desktop clean to be less confusing. But as a result of this, right at the top of a document that can be generated based on this activity, we are seeing that functional flow. That's equivalent to those little gear icons we were seeing in the editor. But the meat of the document is when capture is turned on, it takes a screenshot, and then you can see the narratives are coming in right to the documentation, chronological order of everything that user has done. Like, to state the obvious, this is what the users used to have to build themselves to get something automated. They would have to go through the process and either document it or copy and paste and give it to a programmer to get it automated. And we've thrown technology at all of that pain. Here's the verify step that we used a simple touch to add to the process. And in fact, this particular document was done using both Fiori as well as the SAP GUI that we know and love. And capture was set to listen to both. So it followed the user right across that application boundary from the web browser into the thick client SAP GUI and collected all of those steps. Well, at the top of the document was the functional flow. And when we perform those captures, we use process intelligence as our central repository. The first capture comes in looking like the single line. As additional users start doing captures, they either overlay the same functions or they begin to build out and represent what are the variant flows that the users are doing. And that's the mental picture that I wanted you to have here, because we're very excited about this. As users do captures, we can begin to paint the picture of what's really happening in the system, and that's important in many ways. We've got a lot of easy capabilities like studying the duration. Let's look at the activities and let's highlight what's not acceptable timing-wise. We've got tolerance sliders to control that. But even between the activities, everything that Capture is collecting is feeding this data. We can turn on frequency as we count the number of times that users do things and understand the primary flow versus the corner cases, and even duration between activities with tolerance sliders to understand where do we have slowness in the activities that are happening. Well, this is really all data on a silver platter for our digital transformation teams heading down the path of doing process optimization. But if we go back to the concept of just going after automation itself, really a key element here is knowing exactly what the users are doing so that we've got good coverage. And so you can see here, as we use the automation, the boxes turn blue. And I don't have everything blue at this point. In fact, that's what rolls up to the dashboard here to show that we have 28% automation coverage at this point from a testing perspective. When we use them for testing, they turn blue. When we use them for RPA, they turn green. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But as Shoaib mentioned, for all of that activity we see coming in, it's potential savings if you apply automation. And we're going to measure that journey for you. We'll do the same for RPA and with process optimization, even though all three of those areas we know are often served by different teams. We're bringing them together because of the overlapping value. And on the right, even the divisional breakdown when we're working with the divisions themselves. We are providing insights as to where we think you should go next. For process optimization, what's my next low-hanging fruit? For automated testing, where should I be pointed next for the most value in applying automation? And similarly with RPA. And just a reminder, we can share the automation between RPA and testing, and that really facilitates those types of initiatives. So in the end, what I wanted to do is bring back a couple of slides that Shoaib had used, and the platform slide is one of them. I wanted to just remind, in summary form, what we were just looking at. We did a capture together, and the dotted line is going over to the big blue box for certify. That's our codeless automation, and that's where we started. But when we began to realize that we had the opportunity to collect a lot of great data, that's when we disconnected Capture and made it distributable so that we could send it out into the field and allow users to just do the processes that they know in whatever way they were doing them, whether it's that production user or an exploratory tester or a UAT experience where many users are doing captures. We build automation rapidly through those experiences, and they feed not only the automation, but the process intelligence realm where we can begin to analyze and generate documentation for what's happening. But the other thing I wanted to point out here is that as we begin to use that automation, and I mentioned it turns blue if we use it for testing, and it turns green if we use it for RPA, when we use it, there are dotted lines feeding back into process intelligence. And that's what I wanted to really reinforce here, that process intelligence is that central realm, not only to get started, but to manage the journey and understand what's happening along the way. So in the end, what this ends up looking like is that we take all of those sources and we do use algorithms to bring that data together. In fact, we strategically use AI, ML algorithms throughout our solution in various ways to bring value to the table. In this case, we use it to combine all of those activities into that process intelligence view that we were just looking at. And that allows us to then surface a lot of great value, things that we've already talked about. But as a reminder, understanding what's automated versus not automated yet, and what coverage do we have as a result of that. realizing automation gains in ROI form at your fingertips, real time, all the time, and the actual captured steps turn immediately into automation that is usable for both testing and for RPA. So instead of really just reading these bullets and going through all of them, there is a lot of great value that we are surfacing as a result of bringing all of this together in our connective automation platform. So last but not least, to come back to the data just for a moment, you saw, and this is really what I wanted to reinforce in the demonstration, that the user activity is really what's feeding these visuals. And even beyond the insights that we're using algorithms to determine, we can even use process and procedure to help identify, for example, great RPA targets. That was in the bulleted list a moment ago. So here's a quick example of the types of things we might look at. In fact, I'll just use one. Shoaib mentioned, we can see with red arrows what is a slowness in a handoff in a process. Additionally, the thickness of the arrow here is reflecting the activity. So to cut to the chase, highly frequent used functions where there is slowness involved for the user are candidates for RPA. The question is, it's not a guarantee, but the question is, can we consider using automation to help our users in this area? Because it's very frequently used and yet it's slow in the mix. And so when we do turn those things into RPA, they turn green. This one is clearly also being tested and has turned blue, but that's why this box is both blue and green. And I really wanted to point out that example of how we look for RPA candidates above and beyond the algorithm-based insights that we also provide. So, just as a summary here, everything that we've been looking at rolls up into this dashboard. And that's what I wanted to reinforce, is that's where these numbers are coming from. They're not just manufactured, they're based on factual data that's happening. Yes, we do use some algorithms to construct the Visio style visuals, but for example, the ROI calculations are as simple as what you would do on your calculator or in Excel, for example. That's based on frequency and duration, and you get to configure weighted costs for your FTEs, and you can do that granularly in various areas. Bottom line, we're just allowing you to use that data to understand the value of your automation, both for testing, RPA, and for process optimization along the way. There is immediate value. You can imagine that in getting started with Worksoft, the very first thing you're going to do is put capture in the hands of some of your users, and they're going to be building automation immediately. We didn't even get into our ability to run that at scale, run it in the background, run it in parallel to do it in shorter windows. There's much more that we weren't able to get to, but hopefully the teaser demonstration helped to reinforce some of the capabilities that bring the value that Shoaib was referring to.
Okay, I think that will conclude our session for today. Thank you both for your time, and everybody have a great day.